So, I am excited to be with you. I'm glad that I worked it out because the international date line can be confusing. And I was watching Breaking Bad to get into my Albuquerque kind of groove, thinking that this talk was tomorrow night. And then I realized, oh, it's yeah. So anyway, but excited to be here and with you and wishing I was in Albuquerque. I'm a native of Salt Lake City, but my younger brother works at the Air Force Base and my parents have moved down to live near him. And so we have been to Albuquerque a lot. This is my proof of that I actually rode my mountain bike up to the top of the backside of Sandia. And anyway, so Melissa was one of my favorite colleagues at Utah. So when I found out that she was in New Mexico, and even though I'm in Australia right now, that Albuquerque is my continual landing spot, that I hope that we could come up with some sort of collaborations. I do want to acknowledge, right up front, some of the people that have influenced my thinking on this. And Simon DeAlfonso and Mike Conway are two of my colleagues at Melbourne, and they both kind of have philosophy backgrounds. And so we have a lot of fun talking about these kind of topics. And then Bruce Buchanan, who's an elderly, retired probably close to 20 years now. But he was one of our mentors when we first got faculty positions at the University of Pittsburgh. And he is one of the very early AI and healthcare researchers. And so wanted to acknowledge him. But really, I think one of the great things that's really enlivened my thinking on this is the various students that I've been able to teach in this space. And I don't list Utah there because just the kind of subset of students I taught didn't really intersect with what we're going to talk about today. But certainly at the University of Melbourne, I have the opportunity to teach a lot of kind of practicing clinicians. Last year in my class, the head of the newborn ICU at the women's hospital is one of my students. And so this kind of being able to interact and kind of talk about clinical care, data and informatics and artificial intelligence, my thinking has really been enhanced by my interaction with these students. Okay, so before we go on, I wanted to kind of get a survey of what everyone's kind of thinking about AI. And so I've got this poll everywhere. And so if people can just go to the poll, and it's just kind of like, I believe in the near future, artificial intelligence will greatly enhance my experience of healthcare. And it's kind of agree, disagree. And it should be active. I'm not getting any responses yet. Okay, we're getting some responses in. So let me just bring this over here. Okay, so we're kind of 80%, 75% of people think that artificial intelligence is going to be a positive impact on healthcare. Okay, and then if we have time at the end, we'll repeat it and we'll see if anyone has changed their opinion. Okay. So artificial intelligence is certainly a buzzword right now, but it's been around a while, and it's been around in healthcare for a long time. And so Lewis Thomas, who was a prominent kind of writer and physician, wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1980, the most profoundly depressing of all ideas about the future of the human species is the concept of artificial intelligence. Well, this essay of his got many letters in response, but it kind of brings up that for a while people have been thinking about this issue, and there's been positive and negative feelings about what this is going to be doing to our healthcare experience. So what do we mean by artificial intelligence? Well, when I was a graduate student in the 1990s, one of my professors, Alan Pryor, what I remember him saying is just kind of joking, artificial intelligence is mostly artificial and not very intelligent. And I think that quip still largely holds true, although there certainly have been some kind of radical changes in artificial intelligence in the last few years. As a kind of a term, it dates back to a DARPA conference at Dartmouth College in 1956, where there were 8 or 9 very famous participants there. And this term artificial intelligence was created to capture kind of the variety of work that these 8 or 9 participants were working on. And certainly, even though this is like, this is a 1956 term, the idea certainly predated. And probably the most kind of concrete early vision of what we would call artificial intelligence comes from Leibniz, who kind of envisioned that we would be able to capture all of human knowledge, and then we would be able to compute or reason with it and get rid of all these disputations and disagreements and inability to come to agreements that was ripping apart Europe at the time. And so he was very ecumenical in his vision and what he wanted to do, very practically oriented. And just seeing the limitations of human reason led him to this hope or this dream of being able to basically create artificial intelligence systems. I think that the name is kind of problematic. And Herb Simon, who is a Nobel Prize winner and economist, an artificial intelligence researcher at Carnegie Mellon, one of the original participants in that workshop, what he advocated for a name was, instead of artificial intelligence, he wanted it to be called complex information processing. And so, kind of one of the, kind of thought experiments I want you to keep in your mind is, if you're reading about something, you're hearing about something, talking about artificial intelligence, if you just take artificial intelligence and you substitute complex information processing, see if you have the same reaction to what it is. Because I think that the name is more threatening probably than what the reality is. And the other thing to think about is right from the beginning, the artificial intelligence was a marketing term. So John McCarthy, who was the one that organized the conference and came up with the name, he wanted to differentiate it from other fields, particularly cybernetics. And he, because he didn't want to be under the thumb of Norbert Wiener, he wanted to have his own space to explore these ideas. And so, it's marketing. It does, and I think if we boil down and really look at it, it's not a very good match in terms, especially when we look at what do we mean by intelligence. So if we go to a resource, this is taken from the Stanford Online Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which in turn is taking this from one of the standard artificial intelligence textbooks. We can think of artificial intelligence as either things that act like humans or think like humans, or that acknowledging that humans don't always act and think in like rational or ideal ways. We can think of systems that think rationally or systems that act rationally. So we can this is just we're creating systems that either kind of seem like humans or seem like ideal agents. And we can think of it in terms of either behavior-based or reasoning-based. Okay, so with this kind of matrix in mind, I want to do another poll everywhere. And that is, I just kind of want to ask you some things of whether you think this is artificial intelligence or not. Okay, so first one, let's make sure that these are. So my son becomes interested in learning how to play chess better, and so buys a computer program to practice his chess playing. So is that artificial intelligence? Okay, so looks like about 2/3, a little more than less than 2/3 of people say no, that's not AI. Okay. All right. Good. Let's put another one up here. Okay. As I type my referral letter, my word processor recognizes my spelling errors, suggests punctuations, and rewording of some of my text for improved clarity. Okay, so we've got. Okay, so this is kind of the flip. So this is, people mostly saying this is AI, whereas the majority of you were saying that the chess plane was not AI. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. We do another one here. Make sure it's activated. Okay, as I drive to my oncology appointment, my car automatically maintains my speed to keep a safe distance between my car and keeps me from drifting outside of my lane. So AI, not AI. That's adaptive cruise control. It's looking a little more split. Kind of 50-50 there. Okay. Okay, I think this is our last one. Okay, as I pull into the parking lot at the hospital, my license plate is recognized when I pull into and out of the garage, automatically calculating how much I need to pay for parking. Okay, so again, kind of a close split, but a little more people saying that is an example of AI. Oh no, okay, now we're even. Okay, all right. So those are very interesting responses. I gave a similar poll to a cancer research group a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying like all of this is AI. And I think that all of those really at one time or another would have been considered, artificial intelligence. And the one that most people, the most people said it wasn't AI, the chess playing software, that for decades, that was the target. If we could build something that could play chess, then we've really achieved artificial intelligence. But what John McCarthy kind of lamented was as soon as it works, no one calls it AI anymore. So there's lots of these things that have been incorporated into our life, and if we think of it through that matrix, does it act like a human? So like that adaptive cruise control, or the things that keep me from drifting in my lane of my car. That's kind of like having a navigator. The spell checker, grammar, that's kind of like having a copy editor. So they're all kind of like things that are kind of behaving like humans, albeit in very kind of narrow, focused manner. But I think it's kind of true. As soon as it works, no one calls it AI anymore. So we adopt it. It just kind of becomes background, and we don't think about it or feel threatened by it. Okay, so when we're talking about artificial intelligence, and my former professor emphasizing that it's mostly artificial, well, to me that just means it's created through human engineering processes. And so there's a lot of other things that could be doing similar kind of things as AI, like we can train pigeons to recognize cancerous cells in histology slides. Or we can train dogs to recognize GI cancers through smell. Those are things that are behaving like humans in that matrix, but they're not artificial in the sense that they're not built. So what is intelligence? It's multifaceted, complex cognitive ability. It's related to a capacity to acquire, process, and apply knowledge, to reason, solve problems, abstract, conceptualize, comprehend, make decisions, adapt to new situations, learn from experiences. And I think that if we really drill down to a lot of what is kind of labeled as artificial intelligence, it would be a stretch to say that it's really doing many of these things. And so I think that that's mostly artificial and very little intelligence is still not an untrue quip. And of course, we can have intelligence in lots of things. We have logical, mathematical intelligence, linguistic intelligence, spatial intelligence, emotional intelligence. And our artificial intelligence tasks are probably a very narrow subset of these kind of intelligences. Well, when we think about if you were to take an artificial intelligence class, there's really kind of three approaches to artificial intelligence, and just listing them in alphabetical order. There's representing the universe and knowledge through logic and expert systems, where we try to capture rules and relationships that describe the world that we live in, and then we apply these rules to come up with deductions. The second approach is machine learning, and this is in current 2023, when people are talking about AI, they're really talking about machine learning, and that's where we just try to get a lot of data, and this data will have input and associations with some output. And we just try to, through the data itself, learn mathematical relationships that will predict, outcomes given the inputs. And so, not trying to be explicit in, representing things the way like the logic or expert systems do. And the final approach is probabilities, and that's where we try to represent knowledge about the world through probabilities and use Bayes' theorem to make inferences about the state of the world given certain inputs. And so I think this really captures most of what's going on in artificial intelligence applications. Now, I said like all the buzz is about machine learning. If we're in healthcare and we think about where is artificial intelligence kind of really being used, probably like the vast majority of things is logic and expert systems, where there's just simple decision support tools that are implemented into clinical, electronic health records that are just simple rules. If this, if that, then this is probably what the vast majority of actual artificial intelligence use in healthcare is. Okay, well, why would we be interested in developing artificial intelligence? So what I'm going to share here comes from Andy Clark, who's a cognitive scientist and a philosopher, and he has this book called Natural Born Cyborgs. And what's the role of the biological brain? It is expert at recognizing patterns, at perception, and at controlling physical actions, but it's not so well designed for complex planning and long, intricate derivations of consequences. It is, to put it bluntly, bad at logic and good at Frisbee. So if we're thinking about healthcare, other than like maybe like surgery and like fine motor skill kind of control, being bad at logic but good at Frisbee doesn't seem like much of a selling point for the human brain. But he goes on and he says, what's the human brain really exceptional at? For what is special about human brains and what best explains the distinctive features of human intelligence is precisely their ability to enter into deep and complex relationships with non-biological constructs, props, and aids. This ability, however, does not depend on physical wiring and implant mergers so much as on our openness to information processing mergers. So that's the key term, information processing mergers, and I apologize, I didn't have that highlighted. So really what he's saying is the human brain, what's really remarkable about the human brain is really good at building tools that allows the brain to work better. And he's calling these, brain performance enhancing tools, information processing mergers. And so examples of this would be just paper and pencil. So we think differently and we can do more complex thinking if we couple our brain with paper and pencil than if we just do it on our own. And in even newer technologies, cell phones. So this book was written in the early 2000s. And so, kind of before iPhones and other smartphones. And, Finnish youngsters have dubbed the cell phone, and I apologize for my Finnish, kani, which means extension of the hand. So what you would used to do just with your physical hands, you now have a phone, which is an aid to help you do that. So in this way of thinking, our minds think with a combination of our biological brains, our bodies. I mean, you can see I'm moving my hands around a lot. There are studies that people can just think better if they like look up at the ceiling. And so there's just this whole complex engagement between what our brain does and what our body's doing. And then external objects, like I was saying, like paper and pencil, calculators, books, journals, are all things that our minds think with. And this kind of the overarching kind of theory that captures all this is known as the extended mind theory. And I think that this is a really nice way of thinking about artificial intelligence, that it's a tool that we're building to extend our minds. So medicine already makes extensive use of extended senses. So we make use of diagnostic imaging and microscopes to enhance our eyes. We have stethoscopes to enhance our hearing. And so in my mind, it's really of the same nature that we are making tools, whether, they don't have to be artificial intelligence. We can just think of it like an electronic health record or email or, direct messaging as extensions that are helping us in the tasks that we are trying to overtake. I'm going to skip that poll everywhere. Okay. One of the most interesting quotes that I throw at my students when I'm teaching comes from Alfred North Whitehead. And he said, "It is a profoundly erroneous truism repeated by all copybooks and by eminent people when they are making speeches that we should cultivate the habit of thinking of what we are doing. The precise opposite is the case. Civilization advances by extending the number of important operations which we can perform without thinking about them. Operations of thought are like cavalry charges in a battle. They are strictly limited in number. They require fresh horses and must be made at decisive moments." So if we pause and think about this, so basically the claim here, and this, he's a philosopher writing in the early to mid 20th century. Psychologists have basically confirmed this fact. Our brains have limited capacity. We can only think about so many things. We can only, and what we're thinking about, we can only bring in so many variables about it. So our brain has a relatively small working memory. And if we're constantly having to think about everything that we're doing, we can't do very much. So I think this is certainly true, but at the same time, it's disconcerting. Do we want to tell our physicians, our nurses, to not think about what they're doing? But if we step back and think about it, certainly some things they don't, and we don't. And so where's the balance of that is a challenge. Okay, so why would we be interested in AI in healthcare specifically? So first off is this, the limitations of the human mind. And if people are familiar with Larry Weed, who is one of the early medical informatics researchers going back into the 60s, he draws upon Francis Bacon and his essay, The Idols of the Mind, to just, point out that, we as human beings have limitations. The inherent, mental limitations, kind of what we've been talking about. We have kind of dogmas that corrupt how we see things. Language itself is problematic. And we have all these things that really kind of limit proper cognition, problem solving in the healthcare domain and other domains. And we need aids, we need cognitive information mergers to help us do a better job at that. If I think about why early AI researchers worked on medical or healthcare problems, I think that they recognize that modern medicine exceeds the capacity of the unaided human mind, and that they thought it was a particularly interesting problem. So it was both a pragmatic and a curiosity-driven research. If we think about why we might want some elements of disruptive technologies or just technologies to help us do things more efficiently, the first thing we might think about is just, well, healthcare is really expensive. If we look at percent GDP spent on healthcare, the US is the kind of, hot pink or fuchsia, whatever the right label is here. And what I have on the left is how much we're spending on healthcare, and on the right is how much we're spending on military. And you see, like, the scale is 4 times. This goes up to 16% of GDP. At the peak, we're spending about 4.5% of GDP on the military. Every country, every developed country is struggling under the burden of the cost of healthcare. Also, healthcare is a relatively dangerous enterprise. And so we need to come up with ways of delivering healthcare in a safer manner. And I think related to this is this paper that came out a few years ago. This is May 2020. These are researchers at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. And they analyzed healthcare, and the 60-30-10 is that 60% of healthcare delivery is appropriate either according to evidence or consensus. 30% of healthcare is waste, and 10% is dangerous. And so, that's the status quo. We're only getting it right 60% of the time. And right, it may not even be right, because consensus, it isn't the same as, kind of, evidence-based. So we got 40, you can say, well, 30% waste, someone's waste is someone's salary. But that can be an onerous burden to someone that has to drive 4 hours to a clinic to get, wasteful care. And certainly the 10% danger is something we should all be concerned about. So that's kind of the status quo of healthcare that we would think of. Can artificial intelligence help us with this? If we're thinking about, do we need AI in healthcare? And if you're in Albuquerque, or if I'm in Melbourne, there's plenty of doctors around. And if I look, so Australia has just under 4 physicians per 1,000 people. The US is kind of more down, 2.5. But you can get down to some of these, like, African countries or Papua New Guinea. There's, Niger, there are almost no trained physicians. That's, fractions of a person per 1,000. And so in that kind of healthcare setting, it is less skilled, less trained people that are providing care. And so can we couple, again, these cognitive, information mergers? Can we take a nurse and can we upskill her by coupling her with the knowledge resources of an artificial intelligence, healthcare application? What we think about what our needs are in the United States or Australia, it's going to be very different needs if we look in a different setting. Also, medicine, there's just an overwhelming amount of information that is relevant to any particular healthcare decision. And so this is a graph that comes from Bill Stead and Dan Macy's at Vanderbilt University. And you can see, if we went back to the 80s or even in the 90s, there's really, and this line here, this is how many variables the human mind can keep in working memory, about 5, that we're just vastly exceeding. You see it's a logarithmic scale, vastly exceeding the human mind's working memory capacity relative to relevant data in healthcare decisions. Okay, so that's kind of a motivation for the need. And so I think that it's fair to say it's not like if artificial intelligence or if complex information processing in medicine, it's how. So there's a need, but that's not to say that we know how to do it, in an optimal manner. AI has been around for a long time. So I mentioned the three kind of approaches to artificial intelligence. So if we look at probabilistic AI, the very first paper on this was published in 1961. And this was Homer Warner at the University of Utah that used Bayes' theorem to diagnose congenital heart disease. And this was the very first paper that was a decision support with actual patient data. And it was a time when they were just coming up with the ability to surgically treat these patients. And so they needed to come up with accurate ways of diagnosing them. And of course, all the doctors were shocked that this computer algorithm in 1961 could perform as well as they did in diagnosis. Expert systems or rule-based systems, kind of the classic example of this. This was kind of the era of the 1970s, the 1980s. That's expert systems were the flavor of the day. Mycin was a system developed at Stanford, and it tried to make rules about antimicrobial therapy. And it ended up with about 600 rules that would, just, take input data and then come up with recommendations for therapy. And it worked quite well, but there are challenges with this rule-based. The world is very large, and so coming up with rules to explain everything is challenging, and it requires kind of this explicit verbalization of rules by the experts. And oftentimes experts have what we might call implicit knowledge. I'm sure there's a better word for it than that. But it can be oftentimes hard for them to verbalize and then hence computerize the knowledge that they are working with. Well, this was written up in the New York Times, and Bruce Buchanan, who I mentioned as one of my acknowledgments, was quoted in the New York Times. And I thought it was just kind of telling of how far the world has come. Because in 1977, they're making it a point to point out he has a computer terminal in his home. So this work really, kind of predates our era. Well, what did Bruce figure the systems would be? Well, he didn't think that these would be tools that would replace, but that they would work beside you, that they could be assistants, that they could help you with some of the sub-problems that you were working with, that they would be an information merger in the Andy Clark sense that would free up some of your cognition, to follow Alfred North Whitehead, so you can be thinking about harder aspects of the problem. And then the first kind of paper about using machine learning in healthcare was in 1985 from Kent Spackman, who went on later to be the president of SNOMED. And here, take a bunch of data and use computer algorithms to just try to discover mathematical functions to differentiate your data. Okay, so what are some of the challenges with AI? Well, you can have malicious actors and you have imperfect models. Because of time, I took out how much people worrying about losing their jobs. That's been a worry for decades. But let's talk a little bit about this. So I gave a talk in May about generative AI in healthcare, and this was the first paper that came to my mind when I was asked to give the talk. And I'm going to give you a hint of how I think you should think about this. This is a computer security firm in Israel. And what they did with IRB ethics approval, they put a little Raspberry Pi computer in the radiology department, and they intercepted images as they came off the CT or MR scanners, and they manipulated them and then put them in as duplicates. No patients were harmed. And what they did is they manipulated the images to either remove tumors or add tumors. So here on the left is the original image. And they have manipulated that image on the right to remove the cancerous growth. And the radiologists did not detect that these were manipulated images. So this is kind of scary, but it's a computer security firm. They are demonstrating that radiology networks were not secure enough. And I think that especially in this generative AI era that we're in with ChatGPT and DALL-E and other things, is we have to make sure that there's like very good provenance of our data, that we know everywhere our data has been, every algorithm that has touched the data is going to be a primary concern about artificial intelligence in medicine. These machine learning algorithms can work amazingly well, but then they can be very brittle. And so Melanie Mitchell, who's up at the Santa Fe Institute, published a book on artificial intelligence a few years ago, and these examples are taken from her book. And so people that kind of understand the model can do these manipulations of these images in such a way that they just fail completely. And so we've got this school bus, and the default image, the image classification correctly classifies that as a school bus. But simple manipulations of the image that we could not recognize, they can manipulate these images to always be classified as ostrich. So the school bus, ostrich. Praying mantis, ostrich. Temple, ostrich. Shih Tzu, ostrich. So there's this brittleness to these algorithms that we don't completely understand, that we need to be aware of. And again, data provenance to make sure that there's not manipulation going on. And then these are similar kind of images. These images are all classified as robin, cheetah, armadillo, et cetera, by these algorithms. So there's a brittleness and a susceptibility to hacking that requires data security as a primary concern. The models aren't going to be perfect. If we come up with an artificial intelligence algorithm to diagnose melanoma, sometimes they're going to miss melanoma that are really there, and sometimes they're going to call something a melanoma that's benign. That shouldn't shock us because humans are in the exact same circumstances. I'm sure there might exist something, but there's hardly any decision that can be made in healthcare that's perfect. And so there's always going to be things that we're missing and people that we're inaccurately assigning disease to. And some things can do better than others. We certainly want the best classifiers that we can get, but we know that the classifiers, the artificial intelligence is going to be imperfect. We know that the human's going to be imperfect. So what we really hope for is that by combining the human with a information resource like artificial intelligence or some other information merger, follow Andy Clark, that what we get out of that is better than either the human alone or the computer alone. Well, that's the goal, and it certainly makes sense that can occur. I mentioned that we can train pigeons to recognize histology. Well, if we combine a whole bunch of pigeons, we get very good performance, whereas we only get reasonable performance from any single pigeon. So the same idea of merging humans and machines, we expect performance improvements. But how to do that? So a paper that just my wife sent me this evening showed that this is radiology imaging. If we show you if a radiologist with AI does better than a radiologist without any AI, or does better than just the artificial intelligence, but it matters in which order that we do it and whether we try to explain it. So we got the researchers got the best results if the AI algorithm said what it thought first, and then the human agreed or disagreed with it. than if we do it the other direction of let the human look at the image first, make a decision, and then have the artificial intelligence algorithm tell them what it thought. So the order mattered. And actually, if the algorithm explained itself to the human did a worse job. So that is counterintuitive to everyone thinks that explainable AI is very important. But this paper is saying if we come up with an algorithm that explains its reasoning, the human did a worse job of rejecting bad results because I guess the explanation sounded convincing. One thing we need to think about is how automated do we want medicine to be? We think about our cruise control as an assistance versus self-driving cars. The same kind of decisions need to be made in healthcare. Because we're in this data-driven era of AI, and so our AI tools are generated from gathering large swaths of data. Well, where is that data all generated from? Well, largely from the US. And so this may not be a concern to you, as you are all in New Mexico, but if I'm here in Australia, the data is not going to be as good of a reflection of my context than it is for others. And so that's a challenge. And it could be a challenge for underrepresented minorities within the US, et cetera. So how are people using applications in healthcare? Well, in my home state in Australia, I don't like to call it my home state, but where I'm residing, the health department recently banned AI in healthcare. Now, we don't really know what that means because Epic and Cerner, which are installed here, have lots of little decision support tools that are actively in use and are AI. You know, what they're really saying is the large language models, Chat GPT and other things, you know, you can't use this. I'm looking personally, despite, I mean, I'm not doing this in clinical care, but I'm looking at large language models for text simplification, summarization, translation for patients. At Intermountain Healthcare up in Utah, Idaho, Arizona, there is active pneumonia surveillance going on where artificial intelligence tools read every chest x-ray that's taken in the hospital and reads every chest x-ray report looking for evidence of hospital-acquired pneumonia so that they don't miss cases. If we look at what the FDA has approved, the vast majority, like 75, 80% of all FDA-approved AI tools are imaging tools. So radiology and ophthalmology dominate kind of these FDA-approved applications. And this has, you know, been, you know, decades in the works. And so here's a, you know, recent study out of Lund in Sweden. And what they're doing is they are using an AI to replace the second reader on mammography. And so instead of having two human mammographers read every mammogram, they have one and the AI tool. So it's not really replacing humans. It's freeing up a human to, you know, it's kind of, you know, splitting their work. So, and then here's a recent paper from the New York Times, article in the New York Times from Hungary about using AI to detect breast cancers that are missed by mammographers. Okay, so what are some of the ethical challenges that we face in this space? Well, we need to be able to understand what the AI algorithms are doing. These are points made by my colleague Simon D'Alfonso. There's challenges in, I mean, if something works well, who gets the credit? And if the AI fails, who gets the blame? And you always have to have someone you can sue. So how do these tools relate to this? There's among some people, there's a general concern that if we use these tools, our brains are going to atrophy. And this researcher points out that humans have long outsourced performance of cognitive tasks to others. Like he doesn't do his tax returns, his accountant does. He doesn't book his travel arrangements, his assistant does. But there's an increased reliance. There's a fear that AI assistants will atrophy and degenerate our mental faculties. And so my colleague just bought a car that has the reverse camera and the beeping, and now he's convinced he has become a worse backer upper of his car, whatever the right terminology is, because he is relying on the car to help him instead of doing that. And so I think that we're kind of short on time, so I'm not going to do a poll everywhere. But this is one of the questions that I ask my students. Do they, have to write a response to, affirmative or negative? The use of decision support systems in clinical education should be avoided, as it will inevitably reduce the cognitive and diagnostic skills of students. Should medical students use decision support tools? Or should they wait until they've optimized their clinical skills, but they're going to be using decision support tools in real practice? So how do you, blend that in an educational setting? Microsoft has developed some principles of that AI should follow. Fairness, treat all people the same. It doesn't do that. We know that, minorities, etc., doesn't perform as well. They should be reliable and safe. I kind of showed you it's easy to have them not be reliable. They secure and respect privacy, empower people, should be understandable, and people should be accountable for the AI systems that they build and deploy. I'm going to have this Floridi, I'm blanking on his first name. He's an Italian philosopher at Oxford, and just really great thinker about information. Has come up with these 5 principles for AI in society, and so he kind of takes the 4 traditional principles of bioethics: the beneficence, I'm going to move on, autonomy, justice, and he adds explicability. That these AI systems need to be intelligible and accountable. So an epistemological sense of intelligibility as an answer to the question, how does it work? And then the ethical sense of accountability as an answer to the question, who is responsible for the way it works? So, and adding that 5th point to our traditional framework of thinking about ethics in medicine. So that, I think, Laura, that's close to about when you wanted me to shut up. So we can end there, but I do have this poll. If people want to, if we see if anyone has changed their attitude about in this very rapid review, we can see if people think that any differently about AI than they did at the beginning of the hour. So.
Can't seem to get it to work. Is everybody else getting it to work?
We're getting some people to work. I think we got a few more believers, but it was already a pretty strong believer at the beginning of the hour.